What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here.
Come with me if you want to live.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
The Force will be with you, always.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 20th Century Geek. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and today we are going to be talking about a brand new book. I'm not going to be talking about the book. I've actually got the author with me. I've got him here to talk about not just the book, but about speculative fiction. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of stuff. But before that, I'm going to hand over. We're going to talk to him. Sorry, I've got the book right here. I'm going to speak to him. Guy Morpuss. I'm going to make sure I say that right. Guy, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm very good, thanks. Thanks for having me on, Scott. Very, very happy to come on and talk about Five Minds and about speculative fiction.
No, good. Thanks for taking the time. I really appreciate it. I was going to say, so yeah, Five Minds, the book. It's recently released. It's in hardback. It's out there now. There'll be links below in the podcast, and we'll talk about where to find it. But before we show you where to buy it, Guy, what's it about, and why should people be interested?
Well, I think it raises some interesting issues for people to think about, but that's very much secondary. What I hope it does is it entertains people with a fast and pacey story. The elevator pitch, the one-line pitch would be, what if you could share your body with other people and then you discover that one of them may be trying to murder you? How do you deal with it? That's the short pitch. The longer version is that I've envisaged a society in the near future where children at age 17 get to make a choice, and they can either choose to stay as they are, which is the worker. They can make the decision to have a state-funded life of luxury, which I've called a hedonist, but they then die very young at 42. They can load their mind into an artificial body to save the Earth's resources, but they only get to live to 80. Or the most radical choice of all is you share your body with 4 other people in what I've called a commune. And the advantage of that is you get a new body every 25 years, so you never grow old. You get to live to 142, but you only get to use it 4 hours a day. And I think it raises quite interesting questions of what would you choose if you're presented with that?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, we'll get to some of this because it stopped me in my tracks a little bit reading this book. There's been several moments, and sort of as I'm about halfway through and reading it, there's several moments I'm like, how would I deal with this? Because it is interesting. I love the concept. I will say, I'll throw it out now. And again, there'll be a link there's a link below. I visited your website. I did the personality test. I came out as a worker, and so I'm quite dull and boring, I think, really, in that respect.
I'm not sure necessarily. I think that the worker is perhaps the safe, sensible option. I have to say, my wife, Julie, came out as a worker and wasn't very happy with me for the way the test worked for that reason. I tried to explain to her that being a worker isn't the dull option. If I do it properly, I come out as a commune, so I'd get to live to 142, but I'd have to share my problem. I'm not entirely sure I'd want to.
No, it's an interesting, because again, one of the things I found most interesting, and we'll get to the inspiration actually in a sec, is it really, one of the things that stopped me in my tracks is the age at which these kids get to make the decision. Because we're all 17. I probably wasn't the most sensible person when I was 17. But they have to make that choice. And I love the scene. There's a flashback scene about 80 pages or so in, and it takes you 25 years back to how this commune meet. But I love the fact that there's a fantastic scene, and it's not spoilers, so it doesn't, it's not going to ruin it for anybody. There's this sort of exposition given by like a representative of the government, like a government official kind of thing. She is an Andy or an android, and she goes through the options and she provides this sort of like, each one is an honourable choice in this way. And what we see is there's actually a fifth choice, which isn't really mentioned because it's not a longevity thing. But there is an also thing of like, well, if you choose not to go on, and we don't take that lightly, you're given support and you begin to, all this other stuff. And it really struck me like at 17, it's that thing again of sort of like, it took me back. This one moment, listening to this, took me back to this idea of like being sat down or being talked about right, your GCSEs are the most important thing you're ever going to do. They're going to map out your entire life. So think about what you're going to do. Your A-levels are the most important thing you're ever going to do. And then what you can do at university and this and what you do that. And this idea of these sort of late teenagers still struggling with this self-identity, then having to sort of be laid with this choice, I thought was brilliant. I loved it. But it was like, it really sort of gave me a bit of palpitations, to be honest. So, but yeah, you know, I don't know. So where did that come from? This idea of sort of laying it at that point?
Well, I obviously had to do it at some point, and it's a balance, it seems to me, because the whole idea behind this is the reason that society is doing this is to control the population, to reduce the impact on resources. And if you leave it too late, you're not actually having that effect. And I think the other problem is if you leave it too late, we probably all get much more sensible as we get older. You wouldn't get many people who would choose to live 25 years and be a hedonist with a life of luxury, I suspect. Probably you get lots of people choosing to remain as they are as workers. So I think you need an element of irresponsibility and risk-taking, which you only get with youth, and perhaps 17 is a little young, but it's got to be a balance. You obviously don't want to go much younger than that, but equally I thought going too much older, it starts becoming a different sort of book and a different sort of debate.
No, I liked it. I actually kind of like the age of 17. I think it is. It's a kind of it made me think about the right to vote and the right to drink, and that age really is where you get given these sort of adult responsibilities, and you are sort of, you know, all of a sudden it's like, you know, clocks hits midnight and all of a sudden you're an adult and here you go. And so I like the fact that these things are laid at these kids. And there's a wonderful moment where the woman says to them, she says, "Hello, children," or she greets them as children, and she says, "That's the last time you'll be addressed as such." And again, it's just this wonderful sort of like drawing a line in the sand of like that idea of like your childhood is behind you now, and now you've got to make those adult choices and you know, laying at their feet. So I thought it was great. I like the idea of it. It's I can imagine it, like you say, this is what we're going to the idea of speculative fiction, but I can completely believe that would be the decision made of like, no, that is an age, and to go from that point. Going back to this concept though, what was the original inspiration for this?
It's very hard to remember where it first popped into my mind. I mean, the earliest moment I can remember the idea of body sharing was about 5 years ago, walking down the East River in New York with my wife, Julie, and saying to her, I've had this great idea for a story about this detective who only gets to use a body for 4 hours a day, and he's trying to investigate a crime, but it's a bit like an Uber, you've got body sharing. And how would he cope with that? Every time he gives the body back, is he going to be in the right place? How does he carry on with his investigation? So that was the first idea I can remember. I'm not really sure where that came from, although, you know, I'd read sort of 15 years before Altered Carbon, that great book by Richard about moving minds around, and I suspect that was probably floating somewhere around in my brain. So it's an idea that's been with me for a long time, and then it just sort of developed. She said to me, well, rather than telling me about it, why don't you actually get on and write it? And it took me about 3 years to then finally knuckle down and do that, by which time it was a slightly different book. And I then had to think, well, which I think will come onto it, but is really the thing about speculative fiction. You have this idea, and then you think, well, how's it actually going to work in practice? I had to say to myself, well, you know, how does this work? You make a decision. Can people just go off and be communes if they want to be? Does everyone have to take part? And so it sort of developed from that, and the world building then happened on the back of that. But that was the genesis, as far as I can remember it.
No, it's good. Yeah, I like that idea. That's what I say, because the world building as well is obviously really important, and I love, you know, again, I'm not going to spoil some of the bits because it's sort of important to the plot, but you know, one of the things you talk about there about the world building is consequences. This book in particular, this story, you know, regardless of the mystery, you know, the mystery is great, you know, so it is a murder mystery, you know, in essence, but one of the key parts of the whole thing is consequences. You know, and throughout the story, this idea of making choices and having to live with the consequences, but then not just you living with the consequences, as you say, the impact this has on others, like this ripple effect of consequences. And I don't know if that was that a big part of what you were looking at?
I think that's part of it. I mean, we've got 2 teenage sons, one 15 and one 19. So you spend a lot of time sort of trying to explain to them that you can make decisions, but you know, what you sow, you will reap ultimately. And that you need to be aware that what you do now may have some consequences for you. And I think that's probably part of the thinking, may also be part of the thinking why I pitched it around 17, you know, between the two of them. And so, having tried to educate them about that and thinking about consequences, I suspect that's part of what I was trying to do in the book as well, is saying you can make these great decisions, you can choose to live a life of luxury, and it may look great at age 17, but then suddenly at age 42, that's the end of your life. Is that really what you want? Is that the balance you want?
Yeah, again, like I say, you sort of head some of this sort of like some of this gets met like head on. Like you meet characters, peripheral characters and characters on the way that have made these choices. Like the headness. There's a headness couple. There's an Andy, there's an Andrew couple, and it's this thing of like the choices you make, and you go, well, yeah, of course you're going to hit this age, and like you say, you become a bit more sensible, a bit more risk averse, and all of a sudden, this thing of like this idea of like the lap of luxury for 25 years may not be so appealing. So that appeals to me, this idea of consequences, and I do think about this quite a lot, weirdly, of what choices I made at that age that still impact me now. So this book speaks to me on that level. I love this idea. But the other thing I really like that sort of really struck me as well is human. The human response to this is always going to be the same. Is the get out. You say there's 42 or 142 or all these other things, but you can then gain credit or you can do other things, and so you get the death parks, which is as a sort of the term for them, where people can gamble, they can play games, and in doing so they can gain time back. And so again, all this felt like, yeah, of course that would happen. Like if there was a way to gain more time, of course. So where did the idea for that come from? Or how did that sort of spawn?
Again, the memory is slightly hazy, and it does come from really sitting down and thinking, well, how would this work in practice, as you say? But originally, when I wrote the first chapter, this was actually set on a spaceship, and I was thinking of people going on these sort of end-of-life spaceship cruises, and I was thinking, well, virtual reality, Star Trek, why didn't you have some sort of virtual games you could be playing there? And what about being able to trade some of your time? People can win time off one another, and one person comes out at the end of the voyage as a winner. Yeah. And then I wrote the first chapter on the spaceship, and then I thought, hang on a minute, anyone who reads about a spaceship, unless they love science fiction, they're not going to read this book, and we'll come on to speculative fiction in due course. But what I was trying to do was not write a science fiction book. I was trying to write something more mainstream. So I scrapped the spaceship, and then I thought, well, what about this dystopian park in the middle of nowhere? And you do the same thing, you fight for time. And probably at the back of my mind, I also had, which I'd seen, but I have to say forgotten, that film, I think it's About Time, the one where time is the currency. And again, I probably had that floating at the back of my mind, but I have to say, until someone mentioned it to me, I'd completely forgotten about it. Yeah,
don't worry. I think a lot of people forgot about that film.
The idea was good.
Yes, yeah, it is. Yeah, it was. That's definitely the case with that film. Good concept, not great delivery, but yeah. No, I look at the park, and you meet the people in different. And again, this weirdly sort of had me thinking of like Las Vegas and this idea of sort of like last ditch efforts to change lives and that those sort of things. So it all felt very real. Like, yeah, of course that would happen and that sort of thing. So it's really enjoyable in that sense. But one thing I was curious about is the characters. So our commune, they are very different. They're five very distinct people. Do they come from anywhere, or they are? When I say they come from anywhere, and you haven't got to drop anyone in it. I don't want you to name anybody. But are they all fictional, sort of fictitious? Or was it a case of pulling things from, I know a Ben, I know a Kate, I know a Sierra, or at least those attributes.
There are attributes. I mean, there are bits that are pulled from lots of people, but I can't say I know a Sierra or a Ben, or I know an Alex or a Kate or a Mike. I think my wife would probably say that a lot of them are different aspects of me. Yeah. I slightly think of them in the same way that people sort of think of the crew of the bridge crew of the Star Trek, where each of them is an aspect of character. And I think slightly that's what I've tried to do here, that, you have Sierra, the impulsive one who doesn't care about the consequences, will do whatever she likes for short-term enjoyment. Kate, who's much more careful. Ben, who's a bit geeky. Mike, who's very into his fitness, keeps the body nice and fit for them. And Alex, who's a bit of a sort of everyman. He doesn't, I don't want to give any spoilers away, but, he doesn't have too many obvious characteristics that distinguish him from the others. I think Alex, in a sense, is a bit more us, the reader. Although, you know, and so is Kate, I suspect. You know, they're probably the two that are most near the centre. But no, I can't drop anyone in it and say, no, that was Sarah, or that was Kate, or that was Alex. They're an amalgam of lots of different people and ideas. And you know, one of the things about having been a lawyer for 30 years and a trial advocate is I've seen a lot of different people go through the witness box, and you get to draw on, you know, the good and the bad of what you've seen when people are at their most stressed. It's useful training.
Yes, yeah, and you know, again, you know, I like, and again, it's addressed in the book. I'm not going to get too much in it, but I like the fact they're all very different, that they are stuck together, you know. And one of the things is, in my, you know, my day job, in my real work, as it were, I have to work with a lot of different people, you know, as a project manager, and it's that thing of having to, you know, manage and address those people of different personality types, and then sort of, you know, to work together to try and achieve a group goal, but everyone having slightly different agendas and that sort of thing and stuff. So, and again, it creates a really interesting dynamic in the book. And so, yeah, I find that it's a fascinating idea, this idea of having to share the body, but all having slightly different agendas for the body as well.
Yes, I think it's the ultimate group dynamic, I think, where you know, you end up meeting with someone, or you end up on a team with someone, you know it's going to end. You know, you'll do a project, you'll move on, and I did that. You know, lots of cases in law, you do a case, you then move on and work with different people. But here you're stuck with them for the rest of your life, and the question is, well, how do you deal with the difficult ones when you didn't really give much thought to it when you went into it, and you didn't get to choose? And there wasn't, you know, once you've chosen to be a commune, you're just stuck with 4 other people who someone else has chosen and thinks will work. And
yeah, it's interesting. Well, that's it, because there's a great line as well when they're going through the choices. I love this the scene of when they're making choices is so good, but it's the fact that, like, they actually get told at one point about their lives, because you say every 25 years they're given there's a commune, they get a new body, up to the 5. You know, each of the 5 gets a 25-year stint, basically. But there's a great one where the line says, your first life is basically, your first 25 years is basically figuring out how to work together. And then the rest of them, you get to sort of improve. And I was like, okay, that's a really good, it gives you this different concept of time as well, that actually, you know, you're going to be, like you said, 125 years beyond the 17. So this idea of sort of like, yeah, it's not like having to deal with people and then move on. And it's not even about a case of like, I'm having to live with these people for years in a flat or whatever. Like, no, you are tied to these people because they can't be undone as well. So it's this thing of, I couldn't even imagine the pressure of having to make that decision.
No, and I mean, there's a reason I've chose the first 25 years that they're together. I think that is inevitably going to be the most chaotic and therefore the most interesting from a reader's point of view, because the most things are going to happen. You'd like to think by the 2nd or 3rd or 4th lives that they've settled it down and worked out how to do this. And I think the other interesting thing is that although you're working together, you don't actually get to see one another or talk to one another. And the only way of communicating is through messages, which can't be done in real time, because it was a deliberate choice that when you're switched off, you are off. All you get are your 4 hours a day, because otherwise you could be talking to each other all the time in the background. And I don't think the dynamic would be anywhere near the same, or the problems anywhere near the same.
No. Well, yeah, that'd be noisy and crazy. But and because again, you say it's not just the message you leave; it's whether they choose to read them. And again, I like that the personalities come into sort of into play as to whether or not they get deleted or read or paid attention to. And so, yes, it definitely forms a sort of a unique set of problems for them to deal with. Well, we will sort of move from this point on, because the thing is, because you know, we will hype the book, and I'm going to be. I was writing a review for this for the website, guys, so you know, look out for that soon. But it sits within this genre of speculative fiction, and it tickled when I saw it advertised and stuff. It really tickled my brain because of this idea and of consequences. This idea of taking an idea and running with it, and seeing what the inevitable conclusion was. But so, I checked out your website. So you're a fan of the speculative fiction. Is this sort of an area that you are keen on? Was it something, you know, that you've always been into?
Yes, I mean, I started out when I was very, very young reading sort of thrillers and that sort of thing, whatever my father happened to have on his bookcase. So the sort of Alistair MacLean's, Desmond Bagleys, those sort of thrillers from the 60s, 70s. which were great. And then as a teenager, I started getting into the sort of sci-fi side of things. Philip K. Dick, who does this very well. He throws out an idea, generally in a short story, deals with it very shortly, and there's a reason that so many of his stories and books have been made into great movies. Well, some great, some not so great.
Yeah.
But the ideas are always very clever. So it's always something that's interested me. And then I remember talking to a fellow barrister at some drinks party once, and he told me he was watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I had barely heard of it. I thought this is an extraordinary thing for some 40-year-old man to be watching who's, you know, a credible barrister. But I went away and looked at it and thought, actually, this is fantastic, because all you've got here is the real world. You've tweaked one little aspect of it, which is there are monsters and they're real and they live under the school. And everything else is the same. You've got to go to school, you've got to deal with your classmates, you have relationships, you've got to deal with your teachers, you've got to get your homework done. But in the meantime, you've got to somehow avoid the hellmouth opening and the world being taken over by monsters. And I thought it was a great idea, and it's so well done. And you know, that's something that sort of then led me on to reading a lot more about it. And you know, people sometimes think of it as science fiction, but I don't think it is. I think it's very different from science fiction, because to me, speculative fiction is you take the real world, you give it a little twist, you tweak one thing or two things, and then you ask yourself, well, what if that happened? You know, what would happen? Where would it go? And I sort of view it as playing around with the consequences, and that's what I've tried to do in Five Minds. Not get too wacky or too weird or too science fiction, but just take an idea that you can share a body with other people and say, how would that actually play out?
Yeah, and I like the fact that they say, I do like that idea, that one twist. I've always been sort of keen on that, and I do like, you know, I say science fiction and fantasy, but I am very I am a big fan of this idea of you know, like they call sci-fi realism, or sort of like, you know, even like, you know, magical realism or something. These ideas of the realism is because it's in the real world,
yeah, but
I've slightly tweaked it to be just that bit different, or this is played out. And even the alternate history book, so you mentioned, like, you know, you mentioned Philip K. Dick, and obviously there's the Man in the High Castle.
Yeah.
What happened if if the other side had won? How would that play out? And so so I love these ideas because they can take us in some interesting places. And obviously in Five Minds, not just, you don't just sort of, you know, you've got this idea, but you give it a justification as well. This is extreme resource management. And so so you know, but you were saying before about this idea of speculative fiction, you know, sort of what are some of the you know, this idea of the ideas then for you that, like, the you know, you say about Buffy, but what other ideas have you sort of, you know, have always sort of tickled the ivories for you?
I mean, in terms of things I've read, I mean, there's too many, I suspect, to mention. One of them I read recently, which partly inspired me to get on and get Five Minds down, was The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, which has the idea that this woman is going to kill herself at the end of each day, and someone wakes up in a body, investigates why she's doing this, and then the next morning he wakes up in a different body in the same house and has to go through the process again. And each time he's trying to work out, you know, why is she killing herself at the end of the day? So it's an intriguing premise. So that, you know, that's one of them I've read recently. You know, this The Handmaid's Tale is a great example, I think, of, you know, take a twist, fertility rates have dropped, women have to bear children for elite couples. How does that play out? Not well, as we know. You know, Hunger Games, children fight to the death. I mean, I think the world is full of speculative fiction, but we don't necessarily think of it that way. And I've got lots of people who say, well, you know, I don't really read speculative fiction. I don't read science fiction. It's not for me. And then, you know, you discuss what they're interested in, what they're reading. You realize actually they've been reading speculative fiction all the time, or watching TV shows with it, but they just don't think of it in that way. They think of it as mainstream.
Yeah, I think it's the element of realism, isn't it? It's that idea of it's the amount of realism that I think, weirdly, there's like a barometer that people are willing to accept or not accept, I suppose. You know, you mentioned like Buffy. Buffy's, you know, I love Buffy. You know, a massively successful show, but it centers on the relationships. You know, like one of the episodes that always comes into play when people do the top tens is one of the ones, again, spoilers for anyone for a show that's almost 20 years old or more, but when her mum dies, you know, there's an episode there. It's barely got any of the supernatural stuff in, but it's all about the family because you've known the characters, and it's, again, it allows you to explore those ideas. But then, like you say, you know, you need to have an anchor, I think, for a lot of the mainstream, and keep it as sort of centered, and then, like you say, just slightly take it off to the left or the right, which is I think is. But the thing is, I think when you say about that idea, people do it all the time, don't they, in their heads? That idea of what if. I think you'll find you're right. People probably say that, and I'm sure you've had those conversations with people.
Absolutely, and I think it's how we test ideas and test arguments as well. Again, coming back to my previous life as a lawyer, one of the things you do as an advocate is you try and reduce the argument to the observer, particularly the other side's argument. And you say, well, if you take it this far, it obviously doesn't work, therefore the core argument is false. Now, that's not necessarily logically correct, but it's the way you try and test things. And it seems to me speculative fiction allows you to do the same sort of thing in a narrative form, because, again, it's very similar. You're telling a story, just a different story that you can make up, and you haven't got the facts given to you in advance. And so you take an extreme example. Now, it's very unlikely that we're going to ever be in a world where you do actually share a body with 4 other people. It's unlikely you're in a world where you get the choice that you can die at 42 but live a life of luxury. But I think by posing those questions in a story that is, I hope, entertaining, and where this question is very much secondary, you get people thinking about, well, what should we be doing about the world's overpopulation? What should we be doing about climate change? I'm not sure, that my book is going to change any of this, but if it provokes a bit of discussion by looking at the extreme edges, you never know where it might go. And that's the sort of debate I'm trying to raise, but it's very much secondary, as I say again, to hopefully having an entertaining story, because that seems to me the primary job of any book.
Oh yeah. Oh no, it is, and you'll find that I often wander off into obviously to these ideas, but no, the book is I can't like I say I will admit, I'm not the fastest of readers, and I often sort of get distracted by other things, but I've belted through it. I picked up my copy on Friday, and I have absolutely belted through it whenever I could. So it's a great read. It's very entertaining. The pace is fantastic. That's the thing. It's a bit like I get to the end of because, and I think don't think I'm just blowing smoke, but I think one of the great things that you've managed to do is because of the nature of the commune being those 4-hour stretches, and each being an individual, each of the chapters as it goes through is a fresh perspective, because it goes through the 4-hour cycles. So I'm like getting to the end of a chapter, and then I'm like, I've already learned the cycle. I know who's coming next. So I'm like, great, right? Let's see where we're at. Who am I going to find out what's going to go on next? And it definitely keeps you going on the edge, because it's sort of like, that I'm trying to think of a way of sort of working around it. Use Sierra for an example. They may get to a point where, okay, we have certain information. I know this is important. I know we've got to go and do this. Oh crap, Sierra's next. Can she be trusted to do it? Is she going to read the messages? Is she going to do it properly? Is it going to have the right? Is she going to, and all that? And so it definitely has a driving narrative that really sort of pushes forward. So you've definitely achieved an entertaining book, and that's when it gets to a written review, you'll see. But that's just a given. I think it's a great success.
Oh, thank you. Good to hear, because it seems to me that theme and preachiness always needs to come at the bottom of the list, because I think if you find at the top, what you do end up doing is just preaching to people, and they tend to switch off. There'll be a few who are interested in the concept and will carry on reading. But if the plot isn't there, and if the characters aren't interesting, then a lot of people are just going to put the book down and say, well, great idea, badly done.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think the thing is, I say that because the book works in that way, because it keeps you guessing. Again, sort of there's things to learn. It is a mystery. I think one of the things is it's one of those books I like that. Again, I like the golden age of detective fiction, as they call it. That sort of like the 30s, the mid-war period. A bit of Agatha Christie and all that kind of stuff. I like a lot of those. And I forget the guy's name, but there was the Detectives Club, and they wrote the 10 rules of writing mystery fiction. Yeah. And so I often think, as I read these books, I'm like, oh, is it keeping to the rules? You don't have to, because often the rules are a bit more flexible these days. But there's are clues being laid out for me? If I get to the end and it's a complete left turn, then I'm like, I could never have guessed that. But I like the fact that this is you mentioned Kate and The other ones with Ben or Alex. All there's I seem to be sort of leaning towards Kate as my entry point, really. I think.
Yeah.
And I see this building of clues, and so there have been a couple of times where something's happened. I have gone, I'll flip back. I just want to check something. Yeah, no, I was right. That's fine. It's sort of valid. So I am very much sort of like, even about halfway through, I'm not going to say anything. I have an idea in my head, and I'm sort of cataloging things as we go. So it stacks up as a good mystery as well. So that's the other thing is, it drives my wife a little mad because I'm flicking back and forth at times where I'm like, she's like, what are you reading? So
well, I'm pleased it stacks up as a mystery because I'm a great reader of the golden age of detective stories, and I grew up with Sherlock Holmes and all the rest. So that is actually what I was trying to write, was a mystery story, just in a different way. And one of the reviewers, one of the other authors, described it as a sort of locked room mystery with a new twist on it, which I thought was great. And the clues are all there. I can tell you, I don't want to give any spoilers away, but the clues are all there. The careful reader is capable of working out, who's done what. A few have. Some like that, some don't like that. But I feel, in fairness to the readers, you've got to give them the chance to work it out. And I have an excellent and very meticulous editor, Miranda Jewess, at my publishers, who put a lot of work into this after taking the book on. And she has been meticulous in making sure that I've been fair to the readers. And it's quite difficult when you're giving a perspective from each of the 5 protagonists, one of whom is quite likely to be, the villain, that you've got to treat them fairly. You can do a sort of murder of Roger Ackroyd and have a narrator who is the murderer, but you've got to do it in a fair way. And so yes. I've had to be very careful about doing that. And Miranda has sort of held my nose to the grindstone on that and made sure that I'm not trying to hide things, and readers aren't getting to the end and saying, well, that's all very interesting, but I couldn't possibly work that out. Because I don't think that's fair to a reader of a crime book.
No, I agree. And I've read a couple where I've had that, where you do get to the end and all of a sudden, like the last 30 pages, like a character's introduced and you're like, hang on, like nothing to do with the previous story. And all of a sudden it's wrapped. It's so frustrating. But no, yes, I will say that, I'm picking up, I'm hopefully picking up on the right clues. I may be completely wrong. I might be a terrible detective, but I enjoy that. That's the point. That's the point of a mystery for me. It's a puzzle. That's the idea, and so it works as that. It works as in a great pace. I also have a very visual imagination. To me, I read a book and I sort of see it in my head, so I have a very distinctive look of what this death park looks like. It's a grimy, grotty, horrible place. But I like some of the ideas that parts of it aren't. Like, you have the game rooms that are very techy and then very, very sort of like slick and that sort of thing. So it's this real sort of almost like a contradiction, but again, very human. Like, we'll take care of the bits we care about, the bits that mean something, and the rest sort of falls by the wayside a bit. So in this death park, again, it brings to mind sort of things like weirdly Escape from New York popped into my head. Sort of like this idea that there's one moment where they're in a hotel and they say, well, the room, there's no lock on the door, but we are this many floors up, so I feel relatively secure. And so there's these things in there. So it's this idea of like, what has driven this world to be in this place? Like, I'm fascinated by this thing. So it's really working for me as a an idea.
That's great. I mean, what I've tried to do with the Death Park is, again, it's a bit like taking the first life, being the most chaotic. I've taken the most chaotic bit of this world, and you probably haven't got this far yet, but you do get to see a little bit of the outside world in one of the later flashbacks. And I won't say too much about it, but you do get to see it's probably a nicer place, which is a nicer place than Death Park. But the idea of the Death Parks is this is the bit that isn't controlled. And right towards the end of the book, one of the characters says to the other, the thing I actually like about the Death Park is here I'm not being told what to do. Here I haven't got government looking over my shoulder all the time and I've got to conform. Here I can actually do things that aren't allowed in normal society. And I think that would be attractive to some people. however repellent the death park itself might be as a concept, and however grubby and unpleasant it is.
Well, I'm sure, and that idea, and again, this is why I sort of find the death park sort of a fascinating place. Again, it's a human, it's this idea of it just being a human consequence. Like, if you have to impose this level of order onto the world, there is no way you're not going to have pockets of chaos, because we can't not have that. And often, I mentioned this idea because of the gambling of time, but it made me think of Vegas. But this idea of like what goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas. It's this thing again of sort of somewhere where you can have this hedonistic experience, and this thing exists as this weird little pocket of craziness, and then you go back to the real world, to the normal world. And so I just think it's incredibly human. You can't impose that level of order without or letting some form of rebellion take place, because people have to have a sense that they do have their own control over their destiny.
Yeah, and I think it's also a bit of fun for people to have in the world, and it was a bit of fun for me. The games interludes where you sort of get a different perspective. But one of the important things for me was the games are a bit, I think, like escape rooms. That's sort of the idea I had in mind, or sort of video games. But what I didn't want to do was just be having a game for the sake of a game. So what I've tried to do is each of the games actually develops the plot or tells you something about the character. And again, I don't want to keep harping back to Buffy, but one of the episodes that everyone always goes on about being probably one of the cleverest one is the musical one, Once More with Feeling.
Yeah.
And they could have just done an episode there where everyone was singing and dancing, and it was a great episode and highly amusing, had nothing to do with the plot, and you then move on. But actually, when you watch it, there are loads of integral plot details in there, reveals that characters learn about one another, which impact then for the rest of the series, and probably the rest of the second series that followed, series 6 and 7 that followed. And I'm not going to achieve that level, but I'm trying to achieve something similar, where you aren't just playing games for the sake of games. You're playing games and it's telling you something about people and advancing the story as you do it, not just having a bit of fun.
Yeah, it's hard. I know what you mean, because again, this idea of sort of like I can imagine that there was the temptation of someone just to have like a side quest, like you can go into a game, and the game can be anywhere. Like they go into like New York, and they can go to the places. So you could be like, oh, I can just do this, and I can go off and have a whole, I can do 10 pages just doing this other thing, and it would probably be great and it'd be thrilling. But you like you say, you need to make sure it's propelling the plot. And get that balance. And yeah, the first game, I will say that there's two. I've done two of them. The first game, the one they go to New York, is really cool. The end of that is oddly oddly tragic. It's really cool. But the race over the bridge, this idea again, sort of. Just to going around in circles, and again that repetition of having to go over that bridge, accompanied by the arrogance of the character. And again, I wanted this sort of it's Alex, isn't it, who's the sort of the athlete. Just the supreme confidence in his own physicality, starting to get undermined because of other bits is really good. So yeah. It does work well. It's really good fun. So, it is a great book. I'm really enjoying it. And so, I don't want to spoil it for anyone, much more than what we've done, because we've talked about it quite a bit.
Yeah.
And we've talked quite widely about speculative fiction and stuff. But I think this is a book. If you like speculative fiction, or it's got sci-fi elements, it's a thriller, it's got the mystery elements, it's all in there. Seriously, go check it out. It's as I said, there's links below. One question though, are you going to do any more in this world? Is there anything you want to do more in this world?
Probably, but not immediately is the answer. I mean, there are a couple of chapters that I wrote that I think went to my agent, never actually went to my publisher, which would have lent themselves immediately to quite an interesting sequel, probably with different characters, but in the same world. And I then shelved those because I didn't want to get drawn into doing a sequel. But there have been quite a lot of people saying, you've really just scraped the surface of some of these ideas, and I'd love to see another book in the same world, not necessarily the same people. At the moment, the one I'm working on, my second book, is completely different. It's another speculative fiction idea, but it's set in Vancouver Island. It's in the real world. It's got nothing to do with this. But I am thinking, I mean, I've started a third book as well, which again isn't a sequel, but I'm thinking maybe the third or maybe the fourth book, if people respond well to this, I would quite like to go back and revisit it and maybe look at the life of the hedonist, for example. What's it like at age 17 to say, I only want to live to 42, I want to have a life of luxury, and then you get to 41 and think, oh dear, did I make the right decision? And I think that there's quite fun to be had with that. So I may go back to it, but I think writing sequels is quite difficult, to get it right. And I thought I'd rather just move on and write something completely different for the moment. I had another interesting idea, so I thought I'd give that a go and see how that pans out.
Yes, I saw that. So you got the next book coming out next year, Black Lake, about unwinding times. I've read the blurb of that, so that sounds really fascinating as well. There's another detective story, so I'll be looking forward to that one.
Thank you.
Yeah, but like I say, the looking back, as you say about a sequel, I just like to say to it, like you say, I think people are right. Just scratch the surface of this world. Like, I want the hedonist is fascinating. The idea of the ghost in the shell almost idea of having your mind transferred to an artificial body. How about that? What does that mean? Like, yeah, there's some really fantastic ideas that could be explored. So, I would never say do it. It's your book, you're writing, but I do hope you do revisit this world in the future. As we sort of wrap up though, so where can people find the book? Where can people find you? And anything else you want to plug?
Well, the book came out on 2nd of September. So you can find it now, in most real bookshops. If you go into your local Waterstones, you should find it there. It's available at all usual online, places that sell books. And I won't promote one over any others, but there's plenty that people can find it in. There's a very good audio book which I only heard for the first time when the book came out in full length, and an actor called Joe Jameson, who's done a remarkable job of pulling together 5 different characters, different voices, and I think it must have been quite a challenge for him to do, and he's done a remarkable job. And I listened to it, and actually it sort of brought the book alive to me in a different way of actually hearing someone else's interpretation of the characters. So if for people who aren't particularly into reading books or want something a bit different, I definitely recommend that, the audio book. And if you're not sure, for people who think, well, I don't really read science fiction, this sounds a bit science fiction-y, as I say, it is really a mystery story. It's not science fiction. That's what I'm telling everyone. But if you're doubtful whether you're going to enjoy it, you can go onto my website at guymorpuss.com. And I've always been a big fan of these choose-your-own-adventure games that I played a lot of in the 80s and the 90s. At university, and I've written effectively a choose your own adventure story set in the Death Park, where you can go and play through as a member of a commune and experience what it's like to live for 4 hours a day. You get to play some of the games the characters play. It's not the same as the book, so there are no spoilers, but you do bump into the characters without necessarily realizing it until you read the book. You have a sort of odd meeting in the bar, you see Sierra, you see Alex. So I hope it's a bit of fun, but for those who are unsure about it, go and play that, completely free. If you enjoy it, you might enjoy the book. If you don't enjoy it, then you haven't wasted any money on the book. So I'd advocate that for people who are just a bit uncertain about it and not sure if they're going to like it.
No, yes, a bit of a snippet. There's a link to the website below. It'll be below the podcast. And not only I've seen it. It's on the tab called Adventure Games, and I haven't quite done it yet. I will have a go at that. But also, I said there's the personality test on the website as well, so you can find out whether you would be a hedonist, an android, a worker, or a member of a commune. Good fun. I was a worker, so sensible choices. Made sensible choices. That's what I'd do. Like start a podcast. So yeah, go check out. There'll be some links down below for obviously for Guy's website, for his to the book in several locations. As he said, can be bought from all good bookstores. I don't get kickback in any of them, so I'm not bothered where you buy it from. Just go check it out, really. But yeah, Guy, thank you very much for coming on, giving the time. Also, I hope you all the success with the book. I look forward to finishing it. I may even drop you a quick note on social media to see whether I figured it out or not when I get through to the end. But I also, in fact, look forward to the future books as well. So just thank you for coming on.
No, well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to talk to you about it, and I am very interested to know whether you have seen the clues or not. So do let me know when you finish it, whether you got it or whether I managed to fool you.
Yes, I will. I'll definitely let you know. Yes, thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.